Hello and welcome to another episode of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, John Tian. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, please visit our website, www.gbvdems.org. I've got another great show planned for you tonight. With me in the studio is John Fernandes, a candidate for state rep in the 10th Worcester District. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank
Pleasure
you
to be here.
Thank you for making All Politics is Local a stop on your campaign trail. So.
Well, all politics is local, so how could I not stop?
There you go. So tell us about the 10th Worcester. What's the district all about? What towns are in it, et cetera?
The 10th, every district in Massachusetts, state rep district, and we have 160 of them, is about 40 to 43,000 residents. Mine's on the higher side at this point. I was on a bit of the lower side up until this redistricting.
Prior to the redistricting,
The core of the district has been Milford, Mendon, and Hopedale. That was it when I came into office and up until this term. With the redistricting, I picked up one precinct in Medway.
Okay.
Changes the dynamic. Great community. I've known Medway all my life. I had family that lived in Medway, so as a kid spent time down there. As an attorney, a lot of the early work I did in my practice was with people down in the Medway Millis area, so I got reacquainted with a lot of folks down there through that. Mm-hmm. And it fits in hand in glove with the district I have. The only difference is, up until now, Dick Moore and I have shared the entirety of my district. The one precinct, Medway, is in Karen Spilker's senatorial district,
right,
and the other three precincts in Medway are represented by Jeff Roy.
Okay.
So I have now two additional legislators that I do business with for that one precinct in Medway. But it's great. They're good people. I had worked with Karen anyway.
Yeah.
We co-chair the Metro West Caucus and have for the last several years, so I've been working with her all along. Jeff Roy actually grew up in Milford.
Oh, really?
Across the street from me, down on Forest and Grove.
Wow.
He's about 10 years younger than me, but so I used to throw stones at him as a kid, and he remembers that apparently, but holds no grudges.
He's holding no grudges.
Holds no grudges.
He's not going to hold up your legislation.
He is not trying to do any of that. He's a really enthusiastic, great guy, and it's been a pleasure working with him and helping him. And people talk about whether it's good to have a split town or not. Jimmy Valley represented those precincts in Medway prior to Jeff, and he had 18 years in. So when I picked it up, it was going to be Jimmy and myself. I had 6 years in, Jimmy had 18. Mm-hmm. Good team. But the benefit is, so Jimmy decides all of a sudden he's resigning, picks up a offer to partner up in a significant law firm in Boston.
Right.
He leaves at the end of the term. Jeff Roy comes in. Instead of just having a freshman legislator, the benefit is you have somebody who's got 6 years under the belt, and together we can do more for the community than separately. And historically, that district, people say, well, what about two parties? Well, historically, that district had been Jimmy Valley is a Democrat, Paul Lascoco, Republican out of Hopkinton, mm-hmm. then Carolyn Dykema, Democrat. So it works no matter what. And the good thing is that when it gets to representing the communities, politics is never an issue. And that's been, for me, a relationship with George Peterson. Mm-hmm. Our district's a butt. He represents Upton, I represent Mendon. As a consequence, we have both Blackstone Valley Tech as a school.
Sure, and you
we
also
have
the
Mendon Upton School
District. Yeah.
And there was a point early in the recession when there was some real tension between those communities. And it would have been an opportunity for partisan people to, stick a pin in perhaps the other guy. Mm-hmm. George and I, he's probably my best friend in the legislature, and he's going to be retiring, and I hate to see him go. Assistant minority leader, just a terrific guy. Never an ounce of that. We always worked together. We found common ground to represent the district and the school district, and so politics has nothing to do with that, partisan politics.
Great, great. So if people wanted to get involved in your campaign, what can they do to get in touch with you, make donations, volunteer, et cetera?
Somebody once said to me, geez, I tried to reach you and I couldn't, and I said, that's probably not really a good thing to say, because I think I factored in that there are probably 13 telephone numbers that you can get me on, 3 different websites,
yep.
4 different email addresses. But there's a johnfernandes.org website that people can go to, and that'll link them into email contact, Facebook contact, can donate on the website, whatever, but also a simple phone call to the house or an email to me personally, to the law office, whatever, to the State House is going to get people in touch with me, although we keep the State House out of the campaign.
Absolutely, yeah. You got to keep your State House website, et cetera, separate, completely separate from your campaign. Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about some of the issues that you've worked on in this past couple of years of representing the district.
Well, you know, I look at the job and I see that from my perspective there are really 3 parts to the job. You know, I've practiced as an attorney for 32 years, and I look at that as having multiple components to it. What I like about it is transactional. The people change. Some of them stay around for a long time. But I get to represent individuals with individual problems. I get to represent businesses with business problems, and I get to represent even large international corporations or communities, which I did a lot of work for. So, you know, in my business, I see different types of representation. The State House is much the same. You know, part of the job is that I represent constituents with individual problems they may have, getting access to resources they should be entitled to at the state. Unemployment. You know, the unemployment website got changed, it went down. It was a nightmare for people trying to get registered for unemployment. We have liaisons in every single state agency, and it's a smart thing to do. You don't want 100 or 200 legislators calling line people inside an agency. There could be feelings of intimidation. You could get different answers. So every agency has a liaison, and when somebody has a problem, it's often easier for us to pick up the phone and call a liaison and say, geez, I got a constituent with a problem. Can you help them? Not getting things they don't deserve, getting in and finding out what they do deserve and getting it for them. That's a big part of the job, and the district I represent has a great need for that service.
So you're seeing constituent service as being one of your
absolutely
strong suits.
Top important asset, and I have a great aide who's been around the building now, geez, 20 years. He worked for another legislator before me for 12 years, been in government himself in his hometown of Methuen, gets it, understands it, and is terrific at what I can't do or I'm not in the position to do at a particular moment. He's there and he does it, and he's terrific at it. Ken Willett, he's great at it. The other part of the job, the second part, is that we work with communities. So when a town like Milford is faced with the EPA mandate on phosphorus, it's unique to Milford. That's not even my whole district necessarily, although I think, you know, they came for us, they're going to come for you. Whatever they do here, eventually it's going to go statewide.
It's going to go everywhere, yeah.
But that was a one-off problem. You know, the Draper Corporation revitalization, it's a one-off problem unique to Hopedale. The building of a library in Mendon, where they're trying to get some assistance because, you know, the size of the library doesn't necessarily get them into certain grant programs.
Right.
So we try to help them there. There's a dam issue down in Medway. We try to help with that. You know, these things can become expensive, or a Route 109 project in Milford or Medway. Those are things we work with the community on, the Milford Pond issue. And then there's the larger issue which people think about as the job, which is legislating. You know, finding issues that are of importance and working on them. And I often say to people, you know, we run on certain issues, and it seems they never become the issues we serve on. That, you know, life changes, circumstance change, acute issues come up, and you deal with them. So that's the third part of the job, is we do that. So individually in any of those, there are things we can talk about.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit. I know we talked earlier, and we've got quite a list of legislation that you've worked on over the past couple of years. Why don't we start a conversation around Citizens United and outside money in politics?
You know,
what are your thoughts there?
For people who may not be familiar, the Citizens United tagline is the name of a case the U.S. Supreme Court decided a number of years ago, the consequence of which, in its simplest terms, is it opened the floodgates for almost unlimited amount of money to be spent by super PACs that everybody has come to understand. And we've seen it affect the last couple of election cycles, presidential election cycles. where enormous amounts of money have been spent.
And not only enormous amounts of money, but you would actually call it like dark money, money that we don't know
we
the
call
source
it,
of.
We call it shadowy money, money
Yeah.
that's in the shadows, because what people will do is they'll set up these elaborate schemes of organizations through which money will funnel. I mean, literally opening a corporation, funneling money through and closing it. To get it to another resource. I mean, this is international, I mean, national stuff, not necessarily at the local level, but we saw it at the national level first. It made its way into campaigns statewide. You saw it certainly in the Scott Brown-Elizabeth Warren race. And you then watch it filter down to some big city races in the Boston mayoral race recently. One of the big issues was who was this Boston Fund, I think it was called, or something, or One Boston or whatever. I forget what the name of it was, but near the end of the campaign, this organization showed up spending a bunch of money and nobody knew what it was. Recently discovered to have been, I think, teacher organizations supporting the ultimate winner, Marty Walsh. So it's not like they're on one side or the other necessarily, but it's now, what I like to say is you're going to see it, and you are seeing it coming to campaigns near you. Because it's filtered down where these PACs are organizing in Massachusetts, and their intent is to influence senatorial and state representative campaigns.
Sure. And we look at things like, control of state houses is really vital, because every 10 years we redistrict, right? We redistrict the the legislative districts for Congress, and that's vital, and that's what's causing things like in the past, in the election, I think it was in 2010, the 2010 midterms, Democrats actually got more votes nationally and lost the House. Right? And so, you look at things like that, and that's because of the redistricting and because of the gerrymandering that goes on.
Yeah, you see that happening, but I think the more important thing about Citizens United and the way which it's been used with the super PACs is what we were talking about, the shadowy aspect of the money. Look, if we can't do anything on the state level about who's going to spend money or how much money is going to get spent. But what we can do is we can try and make that spending more transparent, so that if money's going to be spent, people have a right to know who's behind that, so that you don't get an entity calling itself a nonprofit independent organization and using some flowery name that makes it sound that way. But you can see as they operate statewide that they're either an extremely progressive organization trying to elect progressive legislators statewide, or they're an extremely conservative organization, but they don't really tell you that. So instead of being able to judge the source of the information you're getting and put it in context with everything else that's going on in a campaign.
With who's saying it.
Right, you should know that. So one of the provisions in the bill that we passed in the House was that the top 5 donors to an organization have to disclose themselves in the ads. So you know that. So if a particular person with a lot of money is setting up a PAC and almost exclusively themselves funding it, you're going to know that, and you'll be able to, as an intelligent voter, say, well, how does that fit into my thinking on this? Okay, I understand you say this about the candidate that you support, or more often than not, the candidate you oppose.
Don't support.
Let me at least factor in who you are and what your political persuasions and thoughts may be. Because look, it's always made the better person win, but losing control of local elections to outside money, to me, is an incredible threat to the integrity of the process. And I think anything we can do to unravel that and make sure that local people understand where the money's coming from to fund campaigns, that's really important to me. I raise my money locally. I've historically taken very little, if any, PAC money, no lobbyist money. I've stayed away from it. I don't do any fundraising in Boston. What fundraising I've done comes from my district for the most part, or friends of mine who have been friends of mine for my life or through business or whatever, who happen to live outside the district, aren't giving me money to have undue influence from outside on my district, but just to support my effort.
Right, just support your effort.
Big difference
support your
in that kind of stuff. Big difference in that kind of stuff. So we did that in this particular piece of legislation. We'll see it goes. But I think people have to be leery and watch out for that. You're going to get mailings that look independent, but if you look at them, if the Democrats all sound good in the mailing and the Republicans all look like they're not doing what they should be doing, balance that that's probably a very progressively intended piece of literature. If all the Democrats look like they're not doing well and all the Republicans look like they do, it's probably not as independent an organization as it pretends to be. And when you get a survey call in what starts out as a, hey, what do you think? We're just trying to take a survey of who you think is a better candidate in the governor's race or this race, and all of a sudden it turns to what we call a push poll.
Right. What would you think if you heard this about that candidate?
Right, and that starts pushing you in the direction of against that candidate and in favor of a different candidate. You got to understand those aren't independent.
Right.
You know, sometimes the information will be true. They take it out of context often and try to recharacterize who a person is. But again, if you know what it is, then you can be better informed to make the decision. We're never going to stop the push polling, the mailing, the spending, but I do think it's important there be transparency in where the money's coming from.
Right. Well, we remember that famous push poll back in the 2000 election cycle that was done against John McCain.
Sure.
You know, Bush's people in South Carolina. Images of McCain with a dark-skinned daughter were being beamed into the state. Various news shows, et cetera, were showing McCain and his wife and their Bangladeshi daughter who she adopted. And the push poll was, well, would you think, would you still vote for John McCain if you found that he had an illegitimate black child? Terrible, terrible push poll, and it's just awful. Absolutely awful, dirty politics. And certainly that kind of stuff should really be frowned on, and whoever does those should really have to announce who they are and
be held accountable for that. And look, I'm a Democrat, but this isn't an exclusive operation for Republicans.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The progressive Democrats or there are the very, very serious Democratic-leaning organizations out there and supporters who are engaged in the same behavior. We're not going to stop it. But as best we can make it transparent on both sides of this, the informed electorate is most important. And again, particularly at a local level, local control of local elections is what's important to me.
Okay. So we also talked a little bit before about something you did on the gun bill with George Peterson, some reaching across the aisle that you did there. Let's talk about that.
To the point of, you know, the funny point of people trying to characterize me in campaigns like this as some sort of liberal, go-along Democrat. Look, I like to say that I've kind of left the philosophy of politics behind and like to think of myself as a pragmatic person, that to the point life is transactional as I lead it as an attorney and as a person who serves in government. You take issues as they come to you, and you don't say, I'm going to take the perspective on this issue that a Democrat would take. I'm not going to take the perspective on this issue that a conservative Republican would take. You say, what's the problem? What's the solution? That's what we do. So after Sandy Hook, the terrible tragedy down in Newtown, Connecticut, across the nation we saw a reaction. Some states knee-jerked immediately to new gun laws. In Massachusetts we didn't. To the Speaker's credit, Speaker DeLeo, what he said was, look, I'm not going to ask you to act today, people. There were a lot of gun bills that were filed. He said, but look, I'm not going to push any of these bills forward right now. What he did was he set up a commission, very serious people with varied backgrounds, and he said, I want you to go out and I want you to do some hearings, and I want you to talk to a variety of people across the spectrum of mental health, substance abuse, gun ownership, gun access. What are the factors that are playing in here? What are our current laws? Where are there any potential gaps? Because understand something, and I say this to people because they say, well, we're at it again. We've never passed a law that tries to prohibit something which has been 100% successful in stopping the behavior we're trying to prohibit. We just don't, it's not possible. People will always try and find a way around. Our assault and battery laws don't stop assault and battery. Our driving under laws don't stop driving under 100%. And our gun laws and gun violence laws will not stop gun violence 100%. What we try and do is look at the foundation we have today, look at how the problem evolves in response to what our laws are today. And you say, how do we respond to the evolution? What do we do to try and get control of the new problem? There was an article in the Globe recently, shortly after the Speaker took his commission report. That commission report, which he had hoped to have by December of last year, didn't come out till the spring. and it made a series of recommendations on issues regarding mental health, substance abuse, gun access, school safety, and the like. And those recommendations got translated into the bill that Speaker DeLeo filed. But there was a response to that which said, you're knee-jerking to Sandy Hook. And my reaction was, how can I be knee-jerking to Sandy Hook?
18 months after Sandy Hook, yeah.
And so many more school shootings.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know that from when he released that bill, which was probably about 6 weeks ago, there were 3 more school shootings after he released the bill nationwide?
Yeah.
I mean, we were near one of them when my daughter graduated from USC out in Los Angeles, the Santa Cruz one. The Santa Barbara one.
Yeah, the number of school shootings since Sandy Hook is incredible. I think it's 40 or 50 or something similar in that range.
The statistic that the Globe had shortly after the bill came out was that since January of last year, 2013, there had been, I think, 74 school shootings, on average 1 a week.
Yep.
And you know, if it wasn't dramatic, with a lot of people either killed or hurt, it didn't
doesn't
even make
the
front,
news.
It doesn't make front page.
Yeah.
We can't allow that.
Right.
And so this was not knee-jerk to Sandy Hook or anything else. So the bill came out, and it had a lot of really good provisions in it about the issues of how does suicide and suicide awareness, and how does suicide play a role in leading to some of these shootings, because we've seen that suicide is an outcome of many of these at the end of the day. But also, you know, statistically, in Massachusetts, 60% of the gun killings in Massachusetts are suicides.
Okay.
So, you know, that's an awareness issue. How do we get the guns out of the hands of folks like this that are in a position where they're desperate and despondent, and try and control that access? What role does mental health play, and how do we get a better handle on recognizing mental health issues or despondency issues in a school system? What kind of training do people need? Substance abuse, alcohol abuse, how are they playing roles? How can we make our schools safer? Putting a school resource officer in. All of this was a part of that bill. And all of that, by the way, got the endorsement of the Coalition Against Gun Violence, and even the Gun Owners Action League, which is the Massachusetts affiliate to the NRA, went through that 50 or so paragraph or section bill. And I'm reading their review of the bill, and there are section after section in that bill, there was section after section in that bill that the goal would say, we can support this, we can support this, we can support this if it's rewritten a little differently. And then there were the things they opposed. And some of their opposition to sections was very soft. Like, one of the provisions was to say, we want, at gun dealers, a posting regarding the risks of suicide and how you can contact somebody and the rest. So if there is a despondent person who walks in that is still entitled to buy a gun, maybe you catch it. Maybe a family member recognizes and sees the risk in that poster. Well, you know, the goal said, that's not a good provision, we shouldn't make people do that. My response was, that's not a Second Amendment right, guys. Let's focus on the Second Amendment here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
well, that's just almost common sense, much like the lottery on the Keno tube. You'll see, you know, do you know a problem gambler? Do you have a gambling problem? You know,
it was the same kind of thing. Is that somehow a golden solution to this? Of course not.
Right.
But it was one thing they identified in the commission report that said this could be of some use. Awareness is important. You see the Samaritan signs on the highway. Why can't we have a sign at a gun dealer that might catch?
Right down at the Cape Cod Bridge, the Bourne Bridge, right? They've got the Samaritan signs there. You know, the
question in that, the issue there is that if 60% of the deaths, gun deaths, are suicides, and if I'm a gun owner, I don't know that sign's necessarily going to turn me away if what I'm doing is buying a gun to hurt myself. But we know that gun access in the home increases the numbers of suicides.
Right.
So you may want to say, as a gun owner, maybe my son, my wife, my husband, some family member is kind of despondent, and should I put myself in this situation?
Right.
And so another response tied into that we put into the bill was, right now you're obligated to store your guns in your home in a safe. It's kind of either there or you surrender them. one of the things we put in the bill was developing ways to have off-premises storage, safe storage of weapons, so that if you do feel uncomfortable, you're a sportsman, you're a collector, you know, you're a target shooter, whatever the case may be, you're a hunter, and you want to continue to have access to your weapons, but you're concerned about them being in your house, you should be able to have a place where you can store those off-site safely. So all of these kinds of provisions were in the bill that Goal liked, the Coalition Against Gun Violence liked, but Goal had drawn some lines in the sand about 4 or 5 provisions of the bill. So I immediately went to George, who's sort of their spokesman in Massachusetts, George Peterson. He is their guy. And I said to him, George, I agree with what Goal's saying in this bill. I can't support this bill the way it's written either. But can you and I sit down and work on some of these provisions, and can we see if there's a way we can make some recommendations? We weren't alone in our concern. There probably, in all honesty, weren't enough votes to get that bill passed the way it came out. And the Speaker, to his credit, called George and I in, and a couple of other legislators, progressive, what they would call progressive legislators. I'm viewed as a moderate to conservative Democrat in there. George is obviously a Republican, but not a conservative Republican. He's a moderate guy. And a couple of guys who were progressive, Byron Rushing out of Boston, concerned with street crime, not the kind we're talking about, which is also addressed in the bill. And Garrett Bradley, who's another one of the leadership team members, and Ron Mariano, the majority leader. And we sat in a room and we were charged with trying to correct the problems without diluting the bill. And after a few weeks of work, we did that. We rewrote some of the provisions, got them into the bill. The bill was released. And when you can get George Peterson and Dave Linsky to stand on the same stage and say, this is a good bill, when you can get the Coalition Against Gun Violence and Goal to stand together and say, this is a good bill, we now support this bill, we made it happen with some good changes to the bill.
You've got a good bill as well.
We got a good bill. Yeah. We came out of there with cooperation and a coalition that said, if we stay away from the extremes, the bulk sales provisions, 1 gun a month kind of thing, we stay away from that. We stay away from some other stuff on the other side, we can get this bill passed. And it passed the other day with 112 votes, which it might have had half of that or 2/3 of that at some point in time. Not enough to get it passed. So there were some key provisions in that, one of which was private sales. The bill originally would have required a change. You and I, if we're gun owners, licensed gun owners, can do 4 transactions a year privately, where I could meet you, I see that you're licensed, you see that I'm licensed, the gun we're talking about selling to one another is a gun that fits within our category. We do that. We are obligated to file within 7 days a form with the Bureau of Firearms that says what we did.
Okay, so it's more like a registration of the gun.
Right, well, a registration of the transaction. Well, if that gets in there, they do a background check. If there was something wrong with one of our licenses, it's going to pop. Like if the license was lost or stolen, and you weren't who you said you were. They're going to turn back to me as the seller and say, hey, you got to go get that gun back. So the commission said we should not allow that. So the bill was going to provide that all private sales like that had to transact at a licensed dealer location. And the licensed dealer was going to get paid $25. Well, first of all, there wasn't real evidence that was happening.
That it was a problem.
Right.
So it's kind
there
of
wasn't
kind
real
of a solution
evidence
in search of a problem.
It was in that respect, but the potential was obviously there for abuse, and it would have required paying the dealer $25. And you know, I was talking to Chief O'Loughlin about it. We don't even have a dealer in Milford anymore. The nearest dealer is Holliston, and it's open 6 hours a day. So to be able to do that was going to be an inconvenience, and private gun owners said, why are you picking on us with this? So what I asked as a simple question was, well, guys, we can re-register our licenses and registration for our cars online, real time. And if for some reason the transaction in background isn't working out right.
You get notified by mail or.
Well, no, you get to stop. We can't do this. Call the registry or go to a registry office. And if it's okay, we get a green light. So I said, why can't we do our gun transactions that way? And as it turns out, we can. And we're going to. And that was a provision we put in the bill. The Gun Owners League was happy with that. And the really bigger issue was an issue called suitability and who can actually get a gun. And we solved that with some language that straightened that out to the point where the gun owners in my town who I've talked to are happy with it. And like I say, Goal endorsed the bill, and so I was really pleased that we were able to put that together.
Well, that's terrific. That's a good job for you, both you and George there.
Yeah,
so.
and the other people who participated. But you know, there were guys, Tank Naughton, who's the public chair of public safety, who did hearings all over Massachusetts for over a year on this stuff, had worked on that bill, and Dave Linsky, you know, who was coming from the other perspective, had worked long and hard on it. And it was good to see something come together, because there was so much core stuff in there that was good that it would have been a tragedy to see it go down over a couple of linchpin issues that I felt we could solve.
Excellent, excellent. Let's move on to the EPA and phosphorus, the phosphorus issues that we have. Milford being at the head of the Charles River, it looks like we've got some real problems here with phosphorus getting into the river and causing pollution. It's kind of a growth issue, right, isn't it, with algae and plants bloom because of the phosphorus getting in the river? Yeah,
this all dates to the Clean Water Act of, I think, 1973, the National Clean Water Act, which charged EPA with making our rivers and streams and water bodies of a quality that is swimmable and drinkable. That's the charge. Good luck with that, right? So all of what you've seen happen through the 70s and 80s and 90s with sewer treatment plants being built, the one in Milford was an example of that, and it was an effort to get certain obviously contaminants out of our streams and rivers.
Well, it wasn't just that too. I mean, I remember the days in the 60s. My parents used to take us down to the Uniroyal plant in Naugatuck, Connecticut, to get our sneakers. We'd go to the store, the secondhand store, or the factory second store at the Uniroyal plant, and they dumped chemicals
point source
directly,
discharge.
Point source discharge right into the river. 8-foot wide pipes dumping chemicals right into the river, and that river smelled bad. You know, it ran a sickly greenish yellow color from that plant all the way down to the Housatonic, where then the Housatonic carried that pollution out into the Long Island Sound. And so, you know, that really needed cleaning. But I hear what you're saying too about, you know, sewage, et cetera. That's also, you know, contaminant.
Oh yeah. Well, and to that point, you know that the history was that you put these big factories next to rivers because you needed the water for operation. The Draper Corporation is built over a river. Archer Rubber built over the Charles. Literally runs underneath the buildings in those two locations. So that's what people did, and there were point source discharges. So all of that, cleaning up that pollution, cleaning up the direct discharge of sewerage, that was all part of this Clean Water Act. The difference was when we built those sewer treatment plants, the federal government was giving us like 90% money on that, whether it was grant or financing. So they come to these final phases of trying to clean up, and one of the last pollutants they will call to the river are nutrients and phosphorus. Phosphorus is a growth agent. We put it in our fertilizer, right? So why? Because it helps things grow. And the greatest sources of phosphorus falling into our rivers, the greatest source by far is the acid rain pickup of carbon discharge from automobiles and or factories. Gets caught up, comes down with the rain, and ends up in our rivers. The second greatest source was actually fertilizer, maybe like 14–15% of what ends up. And then there's the natural degradation of leaves and that puts it in. What does it do? It causes algae to grow. What does that do? It chokes off the river. So the EPA came down and said, hey, Charles River, all of you communities along the Charles, your new permit for water discharge, because there's a permit every municipality gets every 5 years that says how they discharge into the river, it includes getting phosphorus out of there. So you're going to set up stormwater operations that are going to keep the phosphorus from getting in. And oh, by the way, Franklin, Bellingham, and Milford, we're going to do a pilot project where your businesses participate in that. And the consequence when this happened 4, 5, 6 years ago was it was going to cost our businesses potentially $25,000 to $250,000 to accommodate this if they could do it.
Each business, you're
Each business.
Yeah.
And the estimated cost for the town of Milford was the equivalent of our annual budget, $80 million.
Yeah.
So Senator Moore, myself, we got together with Richie Neal, we got together with town officials. We called the EPA in, and thank God, you know, for Richie and even the senators at the time who got involved, and we started putting pressure on them to say, whoa guys, you gotta slow this baby down. This is not working. And so they withdrew their regulations for reconsideration, and actually been, they still haven't implemented this because we've been pushing back on them so hard. They could come out again at any time, and we'll have new hearings and we'll go after it. But one of the things we did on the state level, my complaint to them was, you're not giving us any money, it's an unfunded mandate, and a big one. And two, you're not looking at alternatives that wouldn't be as expensive. For instance, I said, fertilizer. Well, if that's one of our sources, why don't we do something about that? So to demonstrate to them that we could, I filed legislation in Massachusetts with Senator Moore to eliminate phosphorus from fertilizer. We spent the entire session working with the manufacturers, the landscapers, the retailers, everybody.
To figure out some alternative.
To figure out how can we do this.
Yeah.
And we passed the legislation. The EPA, who we've been fighting, actually gave Senator Moore and myself an award for being able to pass the legislation
Terrific.
in Massachusetts, which was kind of funny. It's like, okay, thank you very much. But they did it because they said, look, if you can do that, if we're asking you to reduce the phosphorus that flows into the river from Milford by 50%, we'll reduce that by a factor of 10. So we'll take that down to like 35%, which can save millions of dollars for the community. So the point was, guys, you're not asking the polluters to solve this problem. You're asking the polluted, the people who are getting this unwantedly, to solve the problem. And they saw that as a valuable effort, and so we're continuing. That was a success, and we're continuing to work to stall this and or find ways to change it.
That's terrific. Let's talk a little bit about, you did some work on an alimony bill.
I did. Massachusetts, 4 years ago, before we made the change, was probably one of the most outdated alimony statutes in the country. Simply not in tune with today's environment, where women may be as successful at earning and leading the household as men were. Very antiquated, very outdated. And what it didn't provide, it was a law that was very draconian. No matter how long your marriage, no matter what the circumstances, if a judge ordered alimony, it was for life. There was no intermediate. There was no rehabilitative alimony or reimbursement alimony. There were no short-term alimony options. People had been trying for literally about 30 years to get this done. And honestly, the horror stories were terrible. I served on the Judiciary Committee, went through a couple of sessions of listening to this. And finally, the committee chairs decided, because there was a lot of pressure from families that had suffered from this, people who had suffered. An example of suffering would be that a guy who was paying alimony thought one day it was going to end because marriage would end an alimony award. So if a recipient got married, they would lose the alimony. Came in and told the story, and he said, I thought I was about to have my alimony terminated because my wife announced that she was doing a ceremony. She was going to have a marriage ceremony, and invitations were sent out, and a ceremony took place, and gifts were brought, and he said, well, okay, can we talk about how we terminate? She said, I'm not terminating anything. I didn't get married. We just went through the ceremony. You don't think I'm that stupid, do you?
Oh, my.
Now, people don't testify under oath at our committee meetings. Maybe that wasn't true. Maybe it was exaggerated. But the problem was that could have been true.
Sure.
And the mere fact that it could have been true pointed out how flawed our alimony laws were.
Right, so someone could just go and do the entire ceremony without actually pulling a license.
But the pressure, the parties had never really gotten together, the different sides, to say, what should we do? So to the credit of the chairs of the Judiciary Committee at the time, Cindy Crean and Gino Flaherty, they set up a committee, and Gino asked me, the House Chair, to serve as chair of the ad hoc committee to reform alimony, and Gail Candaris from the Senate served as the Senate chair. And they put a committee together that had a range of people, including the alimony reform movement. And we got together, and the agreement was that two things. One, we would meet in executive session because we wanted people to be able to speak freely and not speechify while they were doing it. Two, we wouldn't stop working until we had a bill. Three, that as we were creating the bill, we wouldn't move off of a sentence or a section until everybody was in agreement. And four, once we got that bill, if it went to the floor, nobody walked away from it and said quietly to the Speaker or the Senate President, geez, love the bill, but could you tweak that section? You know, the commitment was, if you guys try that, we'll kill the bill on the floor. It'll die. So what people thought had been working for like 30 years to fix and couldn't get it done, we did in 18 months of work as a commission, put out a bill that went to the floor and passed unanimously in both the Senate and the House.
That's terrific.
And you know, people have been, now we went from being the worst alimony state to this particular legislation being viewed as a model nationwide.
Excellent.
For what was done with it. And so look, nothing that I do alone, so don't misunderstand. You're talking to me, and so we're talking about a role that I had. But the people that were put together on that committee did such a fabulous job of understanding what the issues were and making the suggestions on the issues. And our role, Gail Canderas and mine, was to kind of lead them. We weren't the experts. I'd done 2 divorce cases in my 32-year career.
Yeah.
And they were early on, by the way.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
in part, I was selected because I didn't have any kind of a conflict with that. And Gail hadn't done probate for years either.
Right.
So we were able to lead, but bringing the people together and getting them to focus and put together this bill that we were then able to carry through the legislature, that was the work. So I like working in collaboration like that, like we did on the gun bill, like we did on the alimony bill, like we did on the EPA bill. Those are things that mean something to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of those. I like the fixer role.
So yet again, Massachusetts leads this nation.
With that, we do. We actually do. It's been touted nationwide as one of the best pieces they've seen.
I love that. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about post-conviction DNA testing. That's another area that you've been busy in.
When I was Vice Chair of Judiciary last term, this term is almost over, back 2 years ago, I was approached by the Boston Bar Association. They had been working for about 10 years to secure approval of a post-conviction DNA testing bill. And my first reaction was, whoa, guys, that sounds very defense-oriented. And that's not my role in here. Yeah, I do defense work as an attorney, but that's not my role. What's this all about? And as we got into it and they explained it to me, what it's about is we have people, and it's a finite group of people, because you have to understand that today DNA testing in criminal cases is done almost automatically, right? It's a big piece of what we do now investigatively and prosecutorially and defense-wise.
Yeah.
So, but there are a group of people serving very serious sentences for murder, for rape, for other very serious crimes, who have spent, on average, 13 years in jail. Think of it as a child's entire education career, who are innocent of the crime they committed. And that innocence was proven statewide by the application of DNA testing to evidence in their case that was preserved from the time of the crime. So prior to, Massachusetts was, I think, either the last of 2 or the last that hadn't passed some kind of legislation to address this issue. And in part it was because we do have a way of asking for a new trial, but it wasn't specific enough, because when you ask for a new trial in Massachusetts, it's because you have the evidence.
Right.
So
so if you haven't
the chicken
done the
or
DNA
egg,
testing, yeah.
if you haven't had the opportunity to get the access, then you don't have the evidence to present.
Right.
So the bill was directed at creating a process by which a defendant could approach the court and say, I believe, with supporting reasonable explanation, that if you apply DNA testing to the preserved evidence in our case, that I will be found innocent. It will exonerate me. And the flip side of that is, sometimes it will lead you to the true criminal.
Sure.
Because you may have data on somebody else that will match up with that DNA evidence. But there was reluctance. The Attorney General was very reluctant on it. The DAs were very reluctant on it. There were provisions in the bill they just couldn't buy into. And so they asked me if I would sponsor the bill that particular session, because it had been around for like 8 years prior. And I did, and I went to work with the Attorney General's office, the DAs, and some other interested parties to say, you know, what do we need to do to this bill? How do we need to clean it up? And we managed to do that. And we ended up getting it passed in that same session. And it's now been put into use. A couple of cases as to what we meant have gone to the Supreme Court in Massachusetts, and actually my floor remarks on it were quoted by the Supreme Court in their case.
Excellent.
Because they do look to legislative history, and our only real legislative history is what did somebody say at a committee meeting or what did somebody say on the floor. But it was gratifying because it's being applied, and the first case to really show some success with it has already come within a couple of years. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Conviction. It's about the Betty Ann Waters story. She had a brother. She had a brother who was convicted of a crime up in Air, a murder up in Air, and he continuously asserted his innocence in the case, and his sister was about his daughter didn't believe him. His ex-wife didn't believe him. The evidence was somewhat suspect, but his sister was the only person who believed in him, Betty Ann Waters. And so what she did was she actually went to law school with the sole purpose in mind. If you ever get a chance to watch it, it's called Conviction.
I think I have heard about this case now that you mention it, yeah.
She led a nationwide search to, she went to law school and she got nationwide publicity for what she was doing, and Barry Scheck got involved with the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project. And there is a New England Innocence Project now, and Betty Ann Waters went to law school, continued to doggedly chase it, and finally the judge who originally heard the case would never allow any testing. That's what I meant about which comes first. Yeah. He retired, a new judge got on the case, and they convinced that new judge to allow her to go in and get the evidence tested. And the testing of the evidence showed that it wasn't him that committed the crime. I think he had been in jail 12 or 13 or longer years. He was released, and the unfortunate asterisk on that thing was that 6 months later, he was out, he was sitting on a wall, he took a tumble off the wall, hit his head and died. So he was out for 6 months. 13 years of his life lost. To an unlawful conviction. And the tragedy of really only being free for about 6 months. And one of the things that amazes me, because there are about 230 of these cases nationwide, and a few people came and testified at our hearings. Not a person that came and testified at our hearings was angry. They weren't vindictive. They weren't seeking any kind of revenge in what they did. They said, we really just don't want this to happen to anybody else. If you haven't had your freedom taken from you for a long period of time,
you don't know what it is.
You don't want to be mad when you get out. You just want to savor every moment you're out, and you want to do something to make sure it doesn't happen again. So it was really,
it mean something.
It was a really gratifying piece of legislation to do some work on.
That's
honestly.
Great. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about. We have about 12 minutes left, so I don't think we're going to get through everything here. One that's very interesting and right up my alley, being so related to technology, decedent access to online forums like Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, those kind of things.
You remember what I said a little bit ago about you never run, you don't serve on the issues you run on? This one kind of came across my desk just surprisingly. Again, I was vice chair of Judiciary Committee last term, and so I see a lot of the legislation. People come in and talk to me, and this couple came in, a brother and sister team came in, just really salt of the earth people. She was an attorney. I forget what he does. I think he's in the computer industry, but they came in and they kind of pitched me on this bill. And what it was a very simple bill that said, look, upon the death of a person, the person's personal representative shall be able to access the emails of that person. And I said, okay, sounds pretty simple. I'm an attorney. I've done estates. If you're a personal representative, you take that piece of paper, you get out of the bank lets you see the records. You go someplace else, you get the records. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal was that you sign a contract when you click, yes, I agree to the terms and conditions.
Sure, the terms and conditions.
That you never read.
That you never read.
And buried in those terms and conditions is we get to decide what happens with this information, and we can have access to it. And there are terms and conditions in some of these accounts that say, hey, look, your account goes dormant for 3 months, we can kill it. So they weren't, their brother had passed away. They were trying to access this information. They couldn't. If I leave my password behind, this isn't an issue.
Right.
But
if you die unexpectedly,
if my wife happens to be a very good hacker, this isn't an issue, right? She's going to get in, she's going to find out what I said, to who I said it, and everything else. So it shocked me. I was kind of like taken with the oddity of this. So we got the bill. I managed to get the bill out of the House. It got out of the Senate. It got over into the House. We got it to the floor. And it died at the end of last session. And it was like I couldn't really figure out what was going on, because you never know in that building who's pushing a button, because they don't always do it publicly. So this year we filed it again, and I took the lead on it this year. And what I realized about 3 or 4 months ago was that this wasn't about somebody, some young kid in the speaker's office thinking, I don't want anybody looking at my emails, you know? Are you crazy? No, this was about Facebook, Google, Comcast, Verizon, all saying, no. We want to control the decision-making on this. So I was on the phone a couple of weeks ago with the general counsel for Facebook, and I'm saying, what do you even care? This isn't Facebook. We're talking about, I can understand where Google might be on this, or Verizon, or Comcast, but why are you guys taking the lead? You know, and underlying all of this, you know, in my opinion, is there's some interest in who controls data. That's a big issue going forward here.
It's the information age.
It is, and so who controls all this data that's out there? Who's going to get access to it? Is important to these companies, but it's important to us as well. Mm-hmm. So I like to believe, just like when we write a letter, I own it if I keep it. If I send an email to you, I can put it's confidential on the bottom. You don't have to obligate yourself to that.
Right.
So we take chances when we write these things. But when we die, we transact so much business through this medium that our personal representatives should have access to that. And the fight is on over this, and we're close to a resolution this year. Mm-hmm. I've been meeting with those guys, and I think we're close to maybe being able to satisfy both sides, but it's been a fascinating journey through this issue of who controls this stuff,
sure,
and who's going to control the access to it.
It seems almost arcane in the minutia that you're getting into, but yeah, I mean, I can see where, you know, were I to die suddenly, certainly my daughter would want to know, you know.
And if you don't leave her a password and she's not a good hacker, how's she going to get at it?
Right.
Even if she's appointed,
she might even just want the
person
pictures that are uploaded or whatever.
To their defense, and in trying to balance the discussion, what they will say is we're concerned about liability issues. You know, if there's privacy things in there, we're concerned. And my point is, look, I'm an attorney. I understand privacy rights first. Some of them die when you die, and otherwise, you know, if it's already in a third party's hand, I'm not sure the privacy
if there's any
issues
privacy there. Yeah.
But you know, there could be HIPAA issues, there could be bank confidentiality issues. But the truth is, when I take on a personal representative's role, as appointed by a court, I have fiduciary obligations, and I post a bond, and I have responsibilities, and I can't take the information I find and do with it what I shouldn't do, or what you wouldn't do, or what I shouldn't do in that capacity. So they have issues about liability and indemnification and those kinds of things. And we're trying to work on those and give comfort with it. And I'll be interested to see you know, time's running out on the session, but I'll be interested to see if we can get it done.
That'd be great. Yeah. Speaking of time's running out, we are running out of time. We only have about 6 minutes left here. So once again, how can people get in touch with your campaign if someone wants to volunteer or donate?
Oh, well, like I said, I think anybody who's interested in helping out, and like any candidate for office, I need help. I'm going to go out and do everything I'm supposed to do. We'll do media. We'll do all the kinds of touches that you do in a campaign, because you want to, as much as you can, put 2, 3, 4, 5 hits on people to make sure that they know you care and that you're doing something. The bulk of that is me going out and going door to door, and I will do that because my obligation to folks is to say face to face, I'd like your vote, and tell me what you think. But we have a website up. The website will allow people to maneuver to email contact, getting on a mailing list, donating if they want, volunteering if they want. So through that website, johnfernandes.org, they can get wherever they want to get.
Okay, and that's JOHNFERNANDES.org.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, let's spend our last 5 minutes on a real hot button issue around here: immigration. What have you got on immigration?
Well, you know, when I ran for office, my point on immigration is that you have to understand the population. There was a point in the 80s where we had an immigration problem that involved Colombians and Jamaicans that were either involved in dealing drugs or guns, gangs. Mm-hmm. That was a criminal issue, and that was criminal, and it was about them. They weren't here to do good. They were here to make money or do crime or engage in activities that we didn't want them to engage in. Mm-hmm. That had to be dealt as a criminal matter, and we did deal with it as a criminal matter. My view of today's immigration problem is more and a bit different. The people who are coming here today are coming here looking for a better life. Our national immigration policy is so screwed up.
Oh, it's broken.
You can't figure out how to get in if you legitimately want to come here and get here. and start a new life. So people just run across the border. It's not right. I'm not justifying it, but I understand what it's about. And I think their motivation isn't to come here and, hey, say, how do I get on welfare? Maybe there's some that do that, but the majority of people come here are coming here looking for work, and they're looking to create a better life for themselves and their families. Well, if it gets to there's always been a portion of that, and there always will be, the migrant farm workers. I mean, come on. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be a portion of that. But when it gets to the level that it's gotten to, particularly in our area, and it starts to overwhelm you, it starts to overwhelm your schools, overwhelm the hospital, overwhelm the roads, and create either financial, employment competition. Try to be a legitimate landscaper or a roofer today, and the competition you're up against. It's tough. Or it creates danger on our road. My attitude was, first and foremost, employers, you need to be held accountable. We can't, maybe it's tolerable to be in a situation where you hire 10 people and one of them may not be properly on your books. But when it flips over and it's the other way around, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. So legislation that I filed, and pretty harsh legislation that I filed, along with Senator Moore, would hold employers pretty seriously accountable. Getting that through the legislature, not real easy. At the same time, we've been in a position where we have to oppose things like in-state tuition, driver's license for illegals, because it's all sided to one direction, which is making it easier, not harder. And that's not where we should be. We should be looking for a comprehensive solution. I have great sympathy for a person who came here as a young child, 3 years old, as my dad did, from Portugal, and has spent his or her entire life in our school system, and may even graduate as the valedictorian of the class, but can't go out and drive to a job or get into one of our state schools at an in-state tuition rate. I can be sympathetic to that on an individual basis and conceptually, but to deal with that issue in other than a comprehensive way that addresses the employment issues and the other issues, I can't get on that train, and I'm not getting on that train. So recently there was a bill, so designated the Safe Driving Bill, that would have made driver's licenses available to people here who wouldn't otherwise be eligible. I fought that in committee, and we defeated it in committee by a 10-3 vote. I can't go there until we solve this problem, because it's having too much of an impact on our community, and I want to keep pressure on for a comprehensive solution.
Well, that's great. John, it's been wonderful having you here tonight. We're
Thank
just
you.
about out of time. One more time, people can go to johnfernandes.org if they want to find out how to get in touch with your campaign, volunteer, donate, etc. And it's JOHNFERNANDES.org.
Right.
It's been great having you. Really appreciate you taking the
Thank
time
you.
to
I
appear
appreciate
on
the
show.
opportunity to talk, and
we'll
sorry for dominating the conversation.
That's okay. All my guests do that, and I prefer it that way.
That's good. Thank you.
You've been watching All Politics is Local. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, everybody.